You're right. It has to start with Baker Mayfield. Coming from a Baylor website, you would expect that I talk about someone here, but it's all about Mayfield right now. Most websites, from what I've seen, he's always in the top five, and that makes complete sense since he was number 4 in the voting this season. But I mean, coming into his technically a fifth year senior, I see his growth reaching kind of leveling out right now. And I'm really curious how he finds his next top man after losing D.D. Westbrook, too. Excuse me. But right now, I'm also looking at Oklahoma State more so. Mason Rudolph could reach another level his senior year. And at that rate, looking at how D.D. Westbrook was also a Heisman candidate because of how well Baker Mayfield played or vice versa, I really think James Washington could be someone we could look out to break out as a Heisman candidate as well. You look at Corey Coleman 2 years ago at Baylor getting the bulk of the attention. I think a lot of people are starting to see that the Big 12 isn't just quarterbacks, but it's also wide receivers that make their quarterbacks so great. So I keep an eye on James Washington especially.
All right. So if you're a person who likes to lay down a wager from time to time, Baker Mayfield is second in Bovada's release of their Heisman odds for 2017. One of the reasons we're tackling this this topic tonight. So Vegas is wide open. It's got its Heisman odds out there. You can lay down a buck or two. Baker Mayfield at number 2 in the nation in its Heisman odds at plus 1,400, meaning if you throw down $100, you win back 1,400 if Baker Mayfield wins this thing. You mentioned Sean Mason Rudolph. He's way down the list at plus 1,400. So you're right on the money in regards to the gap, at least in terms of perception of Baker Mayfield being out ahead of anybody else in the Big 12. Steve Buechele. Actually, Shane Buechele, I should say. Steve Buechele obviously played baseball for the Texas Rangers and is Shane's dad. Steve Buechele, yes. Shane Buechele, 3,300, his Heisman odds right now. So those are the three guys that are showing up in the Big 12. But I like the James Washington pick. We saw him in the bowl game in particular against Colorado, rip them to shreds. He had another huge season with 1,000 yards. Tough for a wide receiver to play themselves into the mix, although, of course, D.D. Westbrook was able to do it last year.
Yeah, and I think the main thing with Washington is he had an amazing first 5-6 games, and then he kind of leveled off when defenses started seeing and picking up on his unique ability. So if he can start getting a touchdown per game like Corey Coleman was, I think that's when people start paying attention to him. Otherwise, he had incredible games where he almost touched 300 yards against Pittsburgh. And, of course, that bowl game performance. As long as he can start getting that consistency, especially now that he's in his fourth season playing with Mason Rudolph, I really think this could be a season that he reaches just another level. And just another name that people probably aren't looking at, but I've heard a little bit of talk, is Will Grier at West Virginia. He transferred last year, and now he's starting to come back. He'll start playing this year. I've seen him in the top 50 to 1 odds at the top range for him. And we're kind of questioning what his ceiling is right now. He's coming from an SEC school. He didn't have the greatest stats, but we've seen him have an incredible game against Ole Miss when he took down that Rebels team that was a top 5 team back in 2014. So we could see him start reaching maybe some Geno Smith levels. Of course, doesn't have the complete running aspect that Smith did, but we can see what West Virginia can do with him.
So, Sean, those are the guys that are at the very top rung of Heisman candidacy in the Big 12. When you look around the conference, though, who are some guys that stand out to you that could make a breakthrough, really be impact players in the conference? Not necessarily Heisman candidates, but guys that come to mind that you really like and could become somewhat star players this year.
You know, one person I really loved last year, and he had a lot of struggles starting out, was Justice Hill from Oklahoma State. Of course, we're talking about Mason Rudolph already. We've already talked about James Washington, but Hill has had some fantastic games last season as a freshman behind a somewhat questionable offensive line. And you look at some of his games later on in the season when he started hitting 100 yards a little bit more consistently. he has a high ceiling, and of course he has competition trying to get the ball from Mason Rudolph as well. So, but Hill is my pick for the guy that could really come onto the scene and also make Oklahoma State not just a contender in the conference, but someone that could really shake up the national rankings too.